If you've come here tonight seeking rest, you've found the right place. There's no pressure to focus, no need to remember anything. Tonight is simply about allowing your mind to drift, just as water drifts through the sky. We're going to follow a gentle journey, one where nothing urgent happens, where time moves slowly, and where you can let go completely. Settle in, get comfortable, and know that you can drift away at any moment. Tonight, you're going to travel as mist, not rushing, not hurrying, but drifting with the patient rhythm of water vapor as it moves through cool mountain air. You'll begin as part of a cloud, high above distant valleys, and slowly, very slowly, you'll roll over ancient peaks, descend through quiet forests, and finally come to rest as morning dew in a mossy glade. This is a journey measured in gentle hours, in imperceptible transformations, in the soft weight of moisture gathering and settling. There's no destination that demands urgency, no revelation waiting at the end, just the peaceful observation of water doing what water has always done, drifting, condensing, transforming in its endless, patient cycle. You can let your attention wander. You can drift in and out of awareness. Nothing here requires you to stay alert, to remember, to focus. The mist moves whether you're watching or not, and that's perfectly fine. You find yourself high above the earth, part of a cloud that has been forming throughout the afternoon. The sun has traveled across the sky and now hangs low on the horizon, painting everything in soft tones of amber and pearl. You're not separate from this cloud. You are the cloud. Or rather, you're part of its endless collection of water droplets, each one microscopic, each one drifting in the cooling air. The formation of a cloud happens so gradually that there's no single moment when it begins. Moisture has been rising from valleys below, invisible as vapor, each molecule of water carried upward by warm air currents. And as the air rises, it cools. Slowly, imperceptibly, the cooling air can hold less moisture, and droplets begin to form around tiny particles of dust, specks so small they drift unseen. One molecule joins another, then another. Droplets grow, still invisible to any eye below, until there are billions upon billions of them, and together, they become visible as cloud. You are part of this gathering, part of the gentle accumulation of moisture suspended in the sky. The air around you is cool and light. You drift in a space where gravity pulls so gently that you neither fall nor rise, but simply exist in suspension, moving with currents too subtle to perceive individually, but present nonetheless. Around you, other droplets drift in the same patient suspension. There's no crowding, no urgency, just the quiet presence of water held in the cooling air. The light filtering through the cloud is soft and diffused. No harsh shadows here, no bright contrasts. Everything is gentle gray and pearl, and the faintest hint of amber from the sun somewhere beyond the water vapor. This light has passed through countless droplets, scattered and rescattered, softened until it's barely light at all, more like the memory of light, like the glow that remains after sunset, peaceful and dim. Below, far below, the world continues, but you're separate from it now, suspended in this quiet space between earth and the greater sky. The distance below is vast, but not vertiginous. You don't feel the pull of it. You simply exist here, drifting in the cool air, part of the cloud that has no sharp edges, no defined boundary, just a gradual thinning at its margins where it becomes simply air again. Time moves differently up here. The sun shifts so slowly across the sky that you don't notice its movement moment to moment. The cooling of the air happens so gradually that there's no single instant of change. Everything is process, gentle and ongoing. You could measure time in the slow gathering of droplets, in the imperceptible descent of the sun toward the horizon. But there's no need to measure anything. Time simply is, flowing around you like the air itself. And now, slowly, you become aware of movement. Not sudden, not dramatic, just a gentle drift. The cloud you're part of is moving, carried by wind currents so steady they feel like stillness in motion. You're traveling eastward, toward a line of mountains that rise from the landscape like ancient sentinels. These peaks are still distant, their details softened by the miles of air between you and them. But they're there, waiting with the patience of stone. The mountains appear as layered silhouettes, each ridge a shade darker than the one behind it, creating a depth of distance that seems to go on forever. The nearest peaks are deep blue, gray. The middle ranges are lighter, and the farthest ones fade into the same pearl color as the sky, barely distinguishable from the air itself. This is the destination toward which you drift, though destination seems too purposeful a word. You're simply moving in a direction, and the mountains happen to be there. As you drift, you notice the sensation of being part of something larger than yourself. The cloud extends in all directions, a vast collection of droplets all moving together, all carried by the same gentle currents. There's a comfort in this collective movement, in being one small part of a greater whole that moves without effort, without decision, simply responding to the physics of air and temperature and the subtle pull of pressure systems too large to comprehend. The air continues to cool as evening approaches. You can feel it, this gradual change in temperature. Though it's so slow, it's almost not a feeling at all, more like an awareness, a sense that something is shifting in the smallest increments. As the air cools, the droplets around you grow slightly, each one gathering more moisture from the surrounding vapor. Condensation is a patient process, happening molecule by molecule, and there's something deeply peaceful about being part of a transformation that occurs without haste. You drift onward, and the mountains grow slightly larger on the horizon. Though the change is so gradual you wouldn't notice unless you compared this moment to one many minutes ago. The sun continues its descent, and the light shifts from amber to rose to the softest lavender. These colors don't come from the sun directly, but from the way light scatters through the atmosphere, through the water droplets, through the very air itself. You're part of this scattering, part of the process that creates these gentle hues. Below, shadows are gathering in the valleys. The landscape is losing its detail, becoming more abstract with each passing minute. Fields and forests blur together into patches of darker and lighter gray. Green, rivers, if you could see them, would be thin lines of silver catching the last light. But these details don't matter. Your attention is with the cloud, with the gentle drift toward the mountains, with the cool air surrounding you. There's a rhythm to this movement. Though it's so slow, it's barely perceptible. The cloud breathes, in a way, expanding slightly as warming air rises through it, contracting as that air cools and sinks. You rise and fall with these currents, but the motion is so gentle, it feels like floating on calm water, barely moving, just existing in suspension. This is the rhythm that will carry you through the night, through the coming hours of transformation. As darkness begins to gather at the edges of the world, you continue drifting toward the mountains. The journey has begun, but there's no sense of urgency about it. You'll arrive when you arrive, and until then, there's only this peaceful suspension in the cooling air, this gentle movement toward ancient stone, this quiet existence as water held in the sky. The cloud drifts on, patient and unhurried, and you drift with it, part of the mist that is just beginning its journey over the mountains. You're drawing nearer to the mountains now, though the approach is so gradual that each moment seems indistinguishable from the last. The peaks are larger on the horizon, their silhouettes more defined, but you're still high above them, still drifting in the upper reaches of the cloud, where the air is thin and cool and quiet. From this height, you can see the way the mountains form a chain across the landscape, one peak following another, valleys between them like dark creases in fabric. These are old mountains, worn smooth by countless millennia of wind and rain and the slow grinding of ice. They don't rise in sharp, dramatic pinnacles, but in rounded shoulders and gentle slopes, their edges softened by time. There's something comforting about their age, their patient endurance through seasons beyond counting. The light has shifted now into the deep blue of twilight, not yet full darkness, but that transitional time when the sky still holds color, deep indigo overhead, fading to lighter blue near the horizon. The mountains are silhouettes against this color, black shapes against blue, their details lost in shadow. You don't need to see those details. The presence of the mountains is enough, their solid permanence beneath the drifting cloud. As you approach, you become more aware of the air currents around you. The wind, which has been steady and gentle, begins to shift subtly as it encounters the mountains. Air flows like water in some ways, taking the path of least resistance, curving around obstacles, rising over barriers. The mountains force the air upward, and you begin to feel this gentle lifting, this slow ascent as the wind carries the cloud up the first slopes. This lifting is so gradual, it's barely noticeable. You're not suddenly rising. There's no dramatic updraft, no rush of movement, just a gentle, steady climb as the air follows the contours of the mountain slopes. As you rise, the air cools further, temperature drops with altitude. And though you were already in cool air, this additional cooling begins to change things in subtle ways. The droplets around you are growing. Condensation continues, moisture gathering on each tiny droplet, making it slightly heavier, slightly larger. You can sense this collective growth, this slow accumulation of water. The cloud is becoming denser, the spaces between droplets slightly smaller, the whole mass of water vapor transforming imperceptibly from thin cloud to something that might, eventually, become mist. But that transformation is still ahead. For now, you're still high, still suspended in the cooling air, still approaching the first peaks. The nearest mountain rises before you, its rounded summit perhaps 1,000 feet below your current height. The cloud will pass over it. But first, there's this approach, this gradual closing of distance. You drift onward, and the details of the mountain's upper slopes become barely visible in the twilight. You can see the suggestion of bare rock near the summit, lighter gray against the darker slopes below. Lower down, there must be trees, though from this height and in this light, you can't distinguish them. They're just part of the general darkness of the mountainside. Somewhere down there are forests and streams and glades, but they're far below, and your path lies over the summit, not into the valleys, The air has a particular quality now, a coolness that penetrates everything. It's not cold. Exactly. Not the harsh cold of winter, but a gentle coolness, refreshing and clean. This is mountain air, thinner than the air of the valleys, carrying less moisture, less warmth. You can sense its purity, the way it seems lighter, less substantial than the heavier air below. As you draw closer to the mountain, you begin to perceive its scale. What seemed like a simple rounded peak from a distance reveals itself to be more complex. A main summit with smaller ridges extending from it like the spines of a vast, sleeping creature. These ridges catch the last blue light from the sky, their upper edges just barely visible, while the valleys between them are pools of deeper darkness. The cloud you're part of extends far beyond what you can perceive. Behind you, it stretches back for miles, other droplets drifting in the same gentle currents. Ahead, the leading edge of the cloud is beginning to touch the mountain's upper slopes, the first wisps of water vapor curling around stone that has stood here for longer than clouds have existed. There's something timeless about this meeting of cloud and mountain, this encounter that has happened every evening for thousands upon thousands of years. You continue to rise slowly with the lifting air. The summit is no longer far below but approaching your level. Soon, very soon, you'll be passing directly over the mountain's peak and then descending its far slope. But that's still ahead. For now, there's just this steady approach, this gentle rising with the wind, this cool air carrying you upward. The darkness is deepening now. Stars are beginning to appear in the eastern sky, faint pinpricks of light in the deep blue. The moon hasn't risen yet, so the night will be dark, lit only by starlight and the faint glow that lingers in the western sky. This darkness doesn't feel threatening. It's gentle, like a blanket drawn over the world, allowing everything to rest. As you drift nearer to the summit, you can see its rocky crown more clearly. Bare stone, weathered and ancient, rounded by wind and ice. No vegetation grows at this height, just stone and air and, in cracks and crevices, perhaps some hardy moss or lichen, though you can't see such details in the twilight. The stone looks smooth from a distance, but you know that up close it would be rough, textured with the patterns of its formation and the marks of its weathering. The cloud begins to envelope the summit. The leading edge of water vapor touches stone, and the stone is cool, cooler than the air, and the moisture in the cloud begins to respond to this coolness. Droplets in the very front of the cloud start to condense on the stone's surface, joining together into larger droplets, beginning the transformation from airborne water to water that clings to earth. But you're not at the leading edge. You're further back in the cloud, still suspended, still drifting in the air currents. You pass over the summit, and for a moment, you're directly above the highest point of the mountain, though there's no ceremony in this passing, no sense of achievement. You simply drift over stone, carried by the wind that never stops, patient and steady. And now, slowly, you begin to descend. The mountain's far slope falls away below you, and the air begins to flow downward. Following the contour of the land, you descend with it, still part of the cloud, still surrounded by countless other droplets, all of them responding to the same gentle physics that govern water and air and temperature. This descent is as gradual as the ascent was. You're not falling. You're being carried downward by the wind, by the natural flow of air over the mountain's shape. The slope below is gentler than the side you approached. A long, steady decline toward the valleys beyond. The cloud follows this slope, maintaining its gentle contact with the upper mountainside. As you descend, the air begins to warm slightly. Altitude and temperature are linked, and losing height means moving into slightly warmer air. This warming is subtle, just a degree or two, but it affects the balance between condensation and evaporation. Some droplets around you begin to shrink slightly as molecules of water return to vapor. Others continue to grow. The cloud is in constant, gentle flux, responding moment by moment to changes in temperature and humidity. You drift onward, descending the mountain's far slope, moving deeper into the night. The darkness is fuller now, the western glow almost gone, just stars above and the dark shape of the mountain below. You can't see the landscape anymore. It's all suggestion and shadow, but you can sense the presence of the earth below. The way the air currents respond to its contours. Time continues its slow passage. Minutes accumulate into an hour, then longer. But there's no way to measure this time, no markers to count, just the ongoing drift, the gentle descent, the cool air carrying you onward. The cloud moves as it has always moved, patient and unhurried, following the wind's direction, and you move with it. The journey continues, peaceful and slow, carrying you deeper into the night, deeper into the mountains, toward transformations still to come. You're lower now, no longer passing over summits, but drifting among the high ridges that extend like fingers from the main peaks. These ridges are rounded spines of stone and soil, covered in sparse vegetation, tough grasses, low shrubs, and in sheltered spots, small trees bent and shaped by the constant wind. The cloud moves among these ridges like a living thing, though of course it's not alive, just water responding to air and temperature and the shape of the land below. The air here is cooler than it was on the mountain's far slope. These high valleys between ridges trap cool air, letting it pool and settle. And as the cloud drifts through these pockets of coolness, the temperature balance shifts. More condensation, less evaporation. The droplets around you are growing again, accumulating more moisture, becoming heavier. Not heavy enough to fall yet, but you can sense the slow increase in their mass, the way they're gradually transforming from the finest mist to something more substantial. You drift along a ridge, following its length. To your left, the land drops away into a valley you can't see in the darkness. To your right, another valley, equally invisible. The ridge itself is perhaps 50 feet below you, its rocky spine just out of reach. You can sense its presence more than see it, a solid mass of earth beneath the drifting cloud, ancient and unmoving while water vapor flows around it. The wind has shifted slightly, curving as it follows the natural channels between ridges. These channels funnel the wind, giving it direction, and you flow with it, moving along the ridge rather than across it. This is the path of least resistance, the way that air naturally moves through mountainous terrain. There's a rhythm to this movement, a gentle, steady flow that has a quality almost like breathing. As you drift along the ridge, you pass over patches of vegetation. Even in the darkness, you can sense these living things, grasses that have grown short and tough to withstand the wind, shrubs with twisted branches that tell the story of their survival in this harsh environment. In the very coolest part of the night, dew will form on these plants, moisture condensing directly from the air onto their leaves and stems. But that time hasn't come yet. For now, they simply exist below you, dark shapes in the darkness. The cloud is thicker here than it was at higher elevations. You can sense the increased density, the way droplets are closer together, the way the air feels heavier with moisture. This thickness creates a particular quality of silence. Sound doesn't travel far through thick cloud. It's absorbed by the water droplets, dampened and softened. Not that there's much sound to absorb in this high, quiet place, just the whisper of wind moving through grass. And even that is muted. You continue along the ridge, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, you're descending again. The ridge itself slopes downward, leading toward lower elevations, and the cloud follows this descent. As you lose height, the air continues to cool in the hours after sunset. The earth has lost the day's warmth and is now radiating that heat back into the night sky. The air in contact with the ground cools first, and this cooling spreads upward, layer by layer, chilling the air through which you drift. This cooling accelerates the condensation process. The droplets around you are growing more quickly now, adding water molecule by molecule. Each droplet is still tiny. It would take thousands of them to equal the size of a small raindrop, but they're larger than they were, heavier, more substantial. The cloud is transforming, though the transformation is so gradual that there's no single moment when cloud becomes mist. It's a continuum, a slow shift from one state toward another. You drift past an outcropping of rock, its surface dark and rough. The stone is cold, chilled by the night air. And as the cloud's moisture touches it, tiny droplets of water condense on its surface. The stone becomes damp, then wet, as more and more moisture gathers. This is the beginning of the same process that will, eventually, create dew. But here, on this exposed stone, the water won't last long. When the wind shifts or the sun rises, it will evaporate, returning to the air as vapor. The ridge continues its slow descent, and you follow it, patient and unhurried. Time has become something abstract, no longer divided into minutes and hours, but existing as a continuous flow, like the movement of the cloud itself. You could have been drifting for an hour or 3 hours. There's no way to know, no need to know. The only reality is this present moment, this ongoing movement through cool air, this gentle transformation as water molecules gather and the cloud grows denser. To your right, another ridge appears out of the darkness, running roughly parallel to the one you're following. The valley between them is narrow, perhaps 100 feet across, and filled with even cooler air. The cloud begins to sink into this valley, drawn downward by the temperature gradient. Cold air is heavier than warm air, and it settles in low places, creating pools of coolness. As the cloud descends into this cold air, the condensation accelerates further. You're lower now, perhaps only 30 or 40 feet above the valley floor. The darkness is complete. No moon has risen, and the stars, though bright above, provide almost no illumination at ground level. You can't see the valley floor, but you can sense it below you, sense the cold air rising from it. Sense the presence of stone and soil and sleeping vegetation. The cloud continues to fill the valley, and you drift along its length, moving with the gentle air current that flows through this natural channel. The valley curves slightly, following some ancient pattern carved into the mountain by water and ice over countless millennia. You curve with it, moving effortlessly in the darkness. And now you become aware of something new, not exactly a change, but an intensification of the process that's been ongoing. The droplets around you have grown large enough that they're beginning to behave differently. Instead of drifting in perfect suspension, they're starting to settle very slowly through the air. The movement is almost imperceptible, just a gentle sinking, but it's happening. The cloud is becoming fog, becoming mist that hangs close to the ground rather than drifting high in the air. This settling creates a particular sensation, like slowly descending in still water. Barely moving, but definitely sinking. You're part of this collective settling, surrounded by billions of droplets, all responding to the same increase in mass, all sinking together through the cool night air. There's something deeply peaceful about this collective motion, the shared response to gravity's gentle pull. The valley begins to widen slightly, its walls moving apart, and the cloud expands to fill the greater space. You're drifting more slowly now, settling more than moving horizontally, becoming part of a fog bank that fills the valley bottom. The air is very cool here, perhaps the coolest it's been all night, and the moisture continues to condense, droplet by droplet, molecule by molecule. You sink lower, and now you're close enough to the ground that you can sense individual features below you. Boulders, their tops just barely emerging from the fog, the dark shapes of low shrubs. The valley floor itself, rocky and uneven, covered in patches of tough mountain grass. You drift just above all of this, part of the fog that envelops everything in cool, moist silence. The wind has died down almost completely. In this sheltered valley, protected by ridges on either side, the air is nearly still. Movement comes not from wind, but from the gentle mixing of air at different temperatures. From the slow settling of fog toward the ground, you drift in this near stillness, barely moving, just existing in the cool, moist darkness. Time passes. The night deepens, and you continue your slow settling. Your gradual transformation, patient and unhurried as the hours unfold around you. The valley you're drifting through is leading downward, its floor dropping gradually toward lower elevations, and you descend with it. The ridges on either side are lower now, more rounded, and ahead, you can sense a change in the landscape, even though you can't see it. The sparse vegetation of the high ridges is giving way to something denser. Trees are approaching. The first trees appear as dark shapes emerging from the fog, their upper branches reaching up into the moisture-laden air. These are not the tall, straight trees of lower forests, but mountain trees, shorter, tougher, shaped by wind and cold and thin soil. Pines, perhaps, or firs. Their evergreen needles dark even in daylight, invisible in the night except as suggestions of solidity in the fog. As you drift among these first trees, the character of the fog begins to change. The trees act as obstacles, breaking up the smooth flow of air, creating small eddies and currents. The fog swirls gently around trunks and branches, and moisture begins to condense on the needles. Each needle becomes a collecting point for water, droplets forming on its surface, growing until they're heavy enough to slide down to the branch, then down the branch to the trunk, eventually reaching the ground as water rather than vapor. But you're not yet condensing onto needles. You're still suspended in the air, still part of the fog that drifts through the forest. Though you're lower now, close to the level of the upper branches, the trees are all around you, their trunks disappearing downward into deeper fog, their crowns rising above you. You drift between them, moving in the nearly still air, settling gradually toward the forest floor far below. The forest is quiet in a way that the open ridges were not. Here, the trees absorb what little sound exists. The soft whisper of fog moving through branches is barely audible, more a sensation than a sound. Occasionally, a droplet that has condensed on a needle will grow large enough to fall, landing on a lower branch with the tiniest impact. But even this is more silence than sound, just a momentary interruption in the stillness. You continue to descend, and the forest grows denser around you. More trees, closer together, their branches interweaving to create a canopy that, in daylight, would filter the sun into dappled patterns on the forest floor. Now, in darkness, the canopy is just another layer of shadow, but you can sense it above you, sense the way it shelters the forest below from the open sky. The air is even cooler here than it was in the high valley. The forest traps cool air, holding it close to the ground, and this coolness accelerates your transformation. The droplets around you are growing larger, becoming what might properly be called mist rather than fog. The distinction is subtle. Both are water suspended in air, but mist feels denser, more substantial, closer to liquid than vapor. As you drift deeper into the forest, you begin to encounter understory vegetation. Beneath the canopy of trees, smaller plants grow, shrubs and ferns and saplings that wait for a gap in the canopy to provide the light they need to reach full height. These plants are dark shapes in the darkness, barely distinguishable from the ground itself. But they're there, and moisture is beginning to condense on their leaves, just as it condenses on the tree needles above. You're very low now, perhaps only 10 or 15 feet above the forest floor. At this height, you can sense the presence of the ground more clearly. The forest floor is covered in needles and fallen branches, layers of organic material in various stages of decay, creating a soft, spongy surface. Moss grows on fallen logs and on stones that jut up through the forest litter. In the coolest, dampest spots, the moss forms thick carpets, emerald green in daylight, though now just dark patches on darker ground. The mist you're part of is settling into every hollow, every low spot in the terrain. It pools around tree trunks, fills small depressions, creates a layer of moisture-laden air that hovers just above the ground. This is the perfect condition for dew formation, though the transformation from mist to dew hasn't happened yet. That will come later, in the deepest part of the night, or in the early dawn when the cooling is most intense. You drift onward, moving slowly through the forest, descending incrementally. The forest floor rises and falls, following the contours of the mountain's lower slope. You flow over small ridges and sink into shallow gullies, always settling toward the lowest points, always seeking the coolest air. This is the physics of water and air, the natural tendency of denser fluid to sink below less dense fluid, playing out in the slowest possible motion. Around you, the forest is alive in ways that aren't visible. Trees are breathing, taking in carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen, though the process is slow at night, without the energy of sunlight to drive it. Roots are growing, extending through the soil, reaching for water and nutrients. Fungi are breaking down dead plant matter, returning it to the soil. Insects are moving, even in the cool night air, going about their small, essential tasks. But none of this is visible. None of it disturbs the peace of the fog, shrouded forest. Everything is quiet, slow, patient. The trees thin slightly as you drift into a small clearing. Perhaps lightning struck a tree here years ago, creating a gap in the canopy. Or perhaps an old tree simply fell under its own weight, opening space for light. In the clearing, smaller plants have taken advantage, wildflowers that have already gone to seed, grasses that grow in tufts, low shrubs that can tolerate more sunlight than the forest floor beneath the canopy. The fog fills this clearing completely, and you drift across it, moving perhaps 2 feet above the ground now, close enough that you can almost touch the tops of the tallest grasses. The air here is still, protected by the trees on all sides, and very cool. This is the kind of place where frost might form in deeper winter, where the first snow of the season would settle and remain. You continue across the clearing, and then you're among trees again, entering the forest on the far side. The trees here are ancient. You can sense it in their size, in the thickness of their trunks, in the way the forest floor around them is built up from countless years of falling needles. These trees were saplings when your great-grandparents were young, or perhaps even before that. They've stood here through seasons beyond counting, through storms and calm, through winter snows and summer warmth, patient and enduring. The descent continues, so gradual it's almost imperceptible. The slope of the forest floor is gentle, just a few degrees of decline, but over the course of hours, those few degrees carry you downward, deeper into the valley, closer to the lowest point where the mist will finally settle and transform. The forest has its own rhythms, its own patterns of movement that exist beneath the stillness. The trees are breathing, though not in any way that creates sound or motion you could perceive. They take in carbon dioxide through tiny pores in their needles, release oxygen into the night air, maintain the slow metabolism that keeps them alive even in darkness. The rate is slower at night without sunlight to drive photosynthesis, but the process continues, patient and ongoing, just as the mist's settling continues. You drift past a young tree, a sapling perhaps 20 feet tall, growing in a gap where an older tree once stood. This young tree is still fighting for its place in the forest, reaching upward toward the canopy far above, growing slowly in the filtered light that reaches the forest floor. Its trunk is thin, its branches sparse compared to the ancient giants around it, but it's alive, it's growing, and it contributes its own needles to the forest floor below, its own small presence to the ecosystem. The mist condenses on this young tree just as it does on its older neighbors. Droplets form on its needles, grow heavy, and slide down to the trunk. The tree doesn't distinguish between rain and mist and dew. It's all water, all moisture that the tree can use for growth, for survival. And so the water runs down the trunk, slowly, and eventually reaches the ground, soaking into the soil around the tree's shallow roots. As you continue drifting deeper into the forest, you pass through areas where the tree density varies. In some places, the forest is so thick that the trunks are only 15 or 20 feet apart, their branches overlapping above to create a nearly continuous canopy. In other places, the trees are more widely spaced, perhaps because the soil is poorer there, or because some disturbance, wind, disease, fire cleared the area years ago and the forest is still recovering. In the thicker sections, the mist is trapped more completely, held between the trunks, unable to disperse even with a breeze. The air feels heavier in these places, more still, almost stagnant in its quietness. You drift through slowly, your progress impeded by the very stillness of the air. settling gradually toward the needle. Carpeted floor. In the more open sections, there's slightly more air movement, not a breeze. Exactly. But a gentle circulation as cooler air sinks and warmer air rises. This circulation moves the mist in subtle ways, creating slow eddies and currents that carry you in meandering paths rather than straight lines. You might drift left, then right, then back again, all while maintaining your general downward and forward progress through the forest. Time has become unmeasurable. Is it near midnight? Past midnight? Moving toward dawn. There's no way to know in this darkness, in this forest where the canopy blocks even the stars. The only reality is the ongoing drift, the gentle settling, the cool air and the moisture, and the slow, patient process of water finding its lowest level. The forest floor beneath you is varied in its composition. The base layer everywhere is needles, centuries of needles falling from the trees above, accumulating in soft, fragrant carpets that compress under their own weight into layers. The newest needles on top are still brown and distinct, individual. Deeper down, they've begun to break down, to decompose, to merge into a darker mass where individual needles are no longer visible. And deeper still, they've become humus, rich organic material that feeds the trees and supports the understory plants. In places where the needle carpet is thickest, nothing else grows. The acid from the decomposing needles changes the soil chemistry, making it inhospitable to many plants. But in other places, life finds a way. Ferns push up through the needles, their fronds unfurling in spring to capture whatever light filters through. Mushrooms appear in fall, fruiting bodies of vast fungal networks that spread through the soil, breaking down dead wood, forming partnerships with tree roots, playing their essential role in the forest ecosystem. You drift over all of this, seeing nothing in the darkness but sensing the presence of life below, the complex community of organisms that makes this forest more than just a collection of trees. The mist touches everything, bringing moisture to all, connecting the trees to the soil, to the air in a cycle of exchange that has no beginning and no end. The droplets around you continue to grow as condensation accelerates in the coolest part of the night. Each droplet is accumulating water molecules from the surrounding air, getting heavier, closer to the threshold where it will no longer remain suspended, but will settle onto whatever surface it encounters. You're part of this collective transformation. This slow shift from mist that drifts to moisture that settles. You drift among the ancient trees, part of the mist that fills the forest, moving toward a destination you can sense but not see, a place lower still, where the valley bottom widens into a glade, where moss grows thick on every surface, where the cool night air will finally complete the transformation that has been building since you were first part of a cloud high above the mountains. The journey continues, peaceful and slow, carrying you deeper into the forest's embrace, toward rest, toward the moment when suspended water returns to earth. You're lower still, drifting through a section of forest where the trees are massive and widely spaced. Their trunks are so thick it would take several people holding hands to circle them, and their lowest branches start 20 feet above the ground. The forest floor here is relatively open, carpeted with needles and moss, with few understory plants. The mist fills this space completely, a thick, cool presence that clings to every surface. The moisture in the air is approaching saturation now. The relative humidity must be close to 100%. The air can hold almost no additional water vapor at this temperature. Any further cooling will result in immediate condensation. moisture leaving the air and settling onto whatever surfaces are available. This is the threshold you're approaching. The point where mist becomes dew, where suspended water returns to earth. As you drift through this thick mist, you become aware of how close you are to the ground now. Perhaps only 6 or 7 feet separate you from the forest floor. And this distance continues to decrease as you settle. The droplets around you have grown as large as they can get while still remaining airborne. They're at the edge of being too heavy to stay suspended, ready to settle onto any surface they encounter. The trees around you are dripping with moisture. The condensation that began hours ago on their needles has accumulated, droplets joining together into rivulets that run down branches, down trunks, darkening the bark and creating small streams of water that trickle toward the ground. You can hear this dripping, tiny sounds in the stillness, a gentle percussion that's more peaceful than silence itself. Drip, drip, drip. Each droplet completing its journey from vapor to liquid, from air to earth. The mist swirls gently around the massive tree trunks. These movements are barely perceptible, just the faintest stirring as warmer and cooler air mix at their boundary. There's a particular quality to this very thick mist, a sense of being embraced by moisture, of existing in a space where the distinction between air and water is blurred. You're not in water, you can still perceive yourself as being in air, but the air is so laden with moisture that it almost feels liquid. You drift past a fallen log, its surface covered entirely in moss. The moss is thick and soft, emerald green in daylight, but now just a dark, slightly lighter patch against the darker ground. Moisture has condensed heavily on this moss, making it glisten even in the absence of light. The moss acts like a sponge, holding water, creating a reservoir that will remain even when the air dries out during the next day. This is how the moss survives, collecting moisture from fog and dew, holding it through the hours of sunlight until the cool of evening brings more water. As you continue to drift and settle, the forest floor is getting closer. You're perhaps only 3 or 4 feet above the ground now, moving through the thickest part of the mist, through air so heavy with moisture that it feels almost solid. Below you, the carpet of needles is darkening with moisture. The mist is condensing on every needle, every twig, every leaf, slowly wetting every surface. The temperature continues its gentle decline. The night is at its coolest now, in the hours before dawn, when the earth has radiated away the last of the day's warmth and before the sun rises to warm it again. This is the time of maximum cooling, and it's triggering the final stage of your transformation from mist to dew. You drift over a patch of ferns, their fronds spread wide. Moisture has gathered on every frond, creating lines of tiny droplets along the edges. As more moisture condenses, these droplets grow and join together, becoming larger droplets that will eventually be heavy enough to slide down the frond toward the ground. But this process takes time, happens slowly, and for now, the droplets just cling to the fern, making it heavy with water. The forest around you is completely enveloped in mist. Visibility, if there were any light to see by, would be measured in feet rather than yards. The mist is so thick that the trees beyond the immediate vicinity are just vague suggestions, darker patches in the general darkness and moisture. This is the kind of fog that transforms landscapes, that makes familiar places seem strange and dreamlike, that muffles all sound and creates a sense of being separate from the wider world. You're drifting slower now, your descent barely perceptible. The air currents that carried you down from the heights have dissipated almost completely. Here, In the sheltered forest, protected from wind by miles of trees and ridges, the air is nearly still. Movement comes only from the slight mixing of air at different temperatures. And this mixing is so gentle, it's almost not movement at all. Just a vague stirring, a slow circulation. As you drift, you encounter a boulder. Its top rising perhaps 3 feet above the forest floor. The stone is ancient, rounded by weather, its surface rough with lichens that have grown there for decades or centuries. Moisture is condensing heavily on this stone, creating a film of water that covers every surface. You brush against this stone, and in that moment of contact, you transition from mist to liquid. The droplet you're part of touches the stone's surface and adheres to it, joining the film of water that already coats the rock. But in this telling of your journey, you remain with the mist, with the droplets that haven't yet found a surface, that are still drifting in the air, still settling, still moving toward their final destination. You continue past the boulder, moving deeper into the forest, descending the last few feet toward the ground. The forest floor is very close now. You can sense it clearly, the soft carpet of needles, the patches of moss, the fallen twigs and branches, all of it darkening with moisture, all of it waiting to receive the final settling of the mist. And you're part of this final settling, drifting downward, growing heavier, approaching the moment when you'll no longer be suspended in air but will become dew on moss, on needles, on the countless surfaces that make up the forest floor. The mist swirls very gently around you, and you drift with it, patient as water has always been patient, moving toward the lowest point, toward rest, toward the transformation that has been building all night. There's a particular quality to this moment, this time when the mist is at its thickest but hasn't yet become dew. You exist in suspension, literally suspended in air that can barely hold you anymore, balanced at the threshold between gaseous and liquid, between drifting and settling. This is a liminal space, neither fully one thing nor another, and there's something deeply peaceful about existing in this transition. The forest around you is full of these transitions, these boundaries. The boundary between air and water, as mist thickens toward liquid. The boundary between living and dead, as fallen trees slowly decompose into soil. The boundary between night and day, which will come in a few hours when dawn arrives. The forest exists in all these boundaries simultaneously, accepting them all, making room for all states of being. You drift past another patch of ferns, these ones taller than the first, their fronds reaching 3 feet above the ground. The ferns have finished their growing season and are preparing for winter dormancy. Their fronds will brown and collapse with the first hard frost, returning their nutrients to the soil, completing another cycle. But for now, they stand green and alive, covered with the moisture of the mist, their surfaces dark with water. The droplets that have condensed on these ferns are larger than those still suspended in the air. Surface tension holds them in place, keeps them from sliding down the fronds, but barely. Each droplet is a tiny lens, and if there were light, you could see the world distorted and miniaturized in each one. The forest compressed into a sphere, curved and strange and beautiful. As you continue to drift through the thickest mist, you become aware of the weight of the moisture around you. The air feels heavy, substantial, almost liquid in its density. Moving through it, even in the gentle drift, creates a sensation of resistance, as if you're moving through something more viscous than ordinary air. This is air saturated with moisture, air that has absorbed as much water as it possibly can. The temperature continues to drop, imperceptibly slow but steady. The earth beneath the forest is radiating away its stored heat, sending it up into the night sky, and this cooling flows upward through the layers of air. As each layer cools, it becomes denser, sinks, and is replaced by warmer air from below, which then cools and sinks in turn. This creates a slow circulation, a gentle overturning of the air mass, and you're part of this circulation, rising slightly with warm currents, sinking slightly with cool ones, all while maintaining your general descent toward the ground. You drift past a cluster of small trees growing close together, perhaps siblings that sprouted from seeds dropped by the same parent tree years ago. They've grown up in competition with each other, each one reaching for light, each one sending roots into the soil to compete for water and nutrients. Their branches interweave above, creating a particularly dense patch of canopy, and the mist is especially thick here, trapped by the overlapping needles. Below these trees, the forest floor is particularly dark with moisture. The needles there are sodden, dark brown instead of their usual lighter color, almost black with water. The moisture has penetrated deep into the needle carpet, soaking the layers below the surface, creating a reservoir of water that will persist even after the surface dries. The mist continues to drip from the trees around you. The sound has become a constant presence. Not loud, but persistent drip. 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 A gentle rhythm that might be soothing if you were awake to hear it. Each drop that falls carries water from the air to the earth, completing one small journey in the greater cycle. The drops land on needles, on moss, on bare ground, each one finding its place, each one contributing to the general wetness that pervades the forest. As you drift lower, descending toward 3 feet above the ground now, then 2 feet, you enter the zone where the mist is most likely to settle. Here, just above the forest floor, the air is coolest, most saturated, most ready to release its moisture onto solid surfaces. The droplets around you are at their largest size. Any larger and they would fall like rain, pulled by gravity too strongly to remain suspended. You can sense the forest floor more clearly now at this height. You can sense individual features, a small stone half, buried in needles, a twig that fell last week and hasn't yet been covered, a patch of moss spreading between 2 tree roots. Each of these features has its own microclimate, its own particular temperature and moisture level, and the mist responds to each one differently. Over the cold stone, condensation is heaviest. The stone's surface is several degrees cooler than the air, and moisture condenses on it readily. Over the moss, which holds heat slightly better than stone, condensation is still heavy but not quite as extreme. Over the bare needles, the driest and warmest surface, condensation is slowest, though it still happens, adding to the general wetness. The mist drifts onward, and you drift with it, moving through this zone just above the ground, passing over feature after feature, responding to the subtle variations in temperature and surface, always settling toward the lowest, coolest spots. The forest has created countless tiny valleys and hollows at this scale, depressions between roots, low spots where needles have compacted, the spaces beneath overhanging mushrooms. Each one collects mist, traps it, encourages it to condense and settle. You pass over a particularly thick patch of moss, and the draw of this surface is strong, The moss is cool, its surface perfect for condensation, and the droplets around you are responding, settling toward it, beginning the final transition from suspended mist to dew. But you drift past this patch, carried by the faintest air current, still not quite ready to settle, still suspended for a few moments longer. The mist swirls very gently around you, and you drift with it, patient as water has always been patient, moving toward the lowest point, toward rest, toward the transformation that has been building all night, toward the glade that waits ahead where you will finally settle and come to rest. Ahead, the forest is beginning to open. The massive trees thin, their spacing wider, and beyond them, you can sense an open space. This is what you've been moving toward all night, a glade, a clearing in the forest where the trees step back and create a space of grass and moss and wildflowers. In daylight, this glade would be beautiful, a place where sun penetrates to the forest floor, where butterflies visit flowers, where deer might come to graze in the early morning. Now, in darkness, it's just a presence, a space where the mist can settle without the obstruction of trees. You drift toward this opening, moving between the last few trees that mark the forest's edge. The glade is perhaps 100 feet across, roughly circular, bounded on all sides by the dark wall of forest. The ground slopes gently downward toward the center, creating a shallow bowl shape. This is the lowest point of the valley, the place where cool air naturally collects, where moisture gathers, where dew will form most heavily. As you emerge from the trees into the open glade, the character of the mist changes slightly. Without the trees to break it up, the mist forms a more uniform layer, a blanket of moisture perhaps 2 feet thick, hovering just above the ground. You're part of this blanket, drifting within it, still suspended, but settling lower with each passing minute. The ground of the glade is covered in a mix of vegetation. Grasses grow in tufts, some of them native to this elevation, some brought by wind or animals from lower valleys. Between the grasses, moss grows thick in the places where moisture lingers longest. There are wildflowers too. Though they've finished blooming for the year, their stems stand brown and dried, seed heads empty, waiting for next spring to begin the cycle again. But it's the moss that dominates the glade. Great patches of it, spreading across the ground in soft, thick carpets, moss on the few stones that jut above the surface, moss on the fallen logs that lie scattered across the glade, remnants of trees that fell years or decades ago. Moss creates a landscape within the landscape, a miniature forest of tiny plants, each one just a few millimeters tall, but together forming a presence that transforms the glade into a place of softness and moisture. The mist continues to settle, and you settle with it. You're perhaps only a foot above the ground now, drifting in the thickest, most moisture-laden air. The relative humidity is at its maximum. Any additional moisture in the air will have to condense into liquid. The air has reached its capacity to hold water vapor, and now the process shifts from condensation within the air to condensation onto surfaces. You drift lower, moving across the glade toward its center, toward the lowest point. The ground here is almost perfectly level, a small depression where water would pool if there were enough rain. Now there's no standing water, just the thick mist settling onto moss and grass, beginning the final transformation that will turn suspended droplets into dew. The moss is already heavy with moisture. Even before the mist completes its settling, the moss has been collecting water directly from the air, condensing it onto its tiny leaves. absorbing it into its structure. Moss doesn't have roots like other plants. It takes its moisture directly from the air and from rain. This makes it perfectly adapted to places like this glade, where fog and dew are regular visitors. As you drift over the moss, moving just inches above its surface, you can sense its texture even in the darkness. The moss is soft, yielding, creating a surface that's more comfortable than bare ground or stone. In daylight, this moss would be brilliant green, vibrant with life. Now it's just dark, but you can sense its living presence, its patient absorption of the moisture you're carrying. The mist is settling onto every surface now, on the grass stems, creating rows of tiny droplets that follow the length of each blade, on the dried flower stems, gathering at nodes and joints, on the moss, spreading across its surface in an almost invisible film that will gradually thicken into visible droplets, and on the scattered stones and logs, creating a coating of water that makes everything glisten. Though there's no light to see this glistening by, you continue to drift, but your time as suspended mist is drawing to a close. The droplet you're part of is settling toward the moss, drawn by gravity, by the natural tendency of water to seek the lowest point. You're perhaps only 6 inches above the moss now, then 4 inches, then 2. The space between you and the moss is closing. Slowly but inevitably, the air is very still. In this sheltered glade, protected by the surrounding forest, there's almost no movement at all, just the gentle settling of mist, the quiet condensation of moisture onto every surface, the peaceful transition from vapor to liquid that happens in the coolest part of the night. And now, slowly, inevitably, you settle onto the moss. The droplet you're part of touches the soft, living surface, and in that moment, you transition from mist to dew. You're no longer suspended in air but resting on earth, part of the moisture that coats this small patch of moss in the center of the glade. The sensation of settling is peaceful, like coming to rest after a long journey. There's no impact, no sense of arrival, just a gentle transition from movement to stillness, from suspension to rest. You're part of the dew now, part of the moisture that has settled on the moss, and you'll remain here through the remaining darkness, through the coming dawn, until the sun rises high enough to warm the air and begin the process of evaporation that will eventually return you to vapor. But that's still hours away. For now, there's only rest, only the cool darkness, only the peaceful presence of moisture on moss in a quiet glade. Time passes in the darkness. How much time? An hour, perhaps 2. The night is deep and still, and you rest on the moss, part of the dew that coats every surface in the glade. The moisture has spread across the moss, not as individual droplets, but as a film of water that penetrates into the tiny leaves, that settles between the plants, that creates a general wetness that permeates everything. The moss is drinking this moisture, absorbing it into its structure. Moss doesn't drink quickly. It's a slow process, molecule by molecule, as water moves into the plant's tissues. But drink it does, storing the moisture against the coming day when the sun will dry the air and make this water precious. This is how the moss survives, gathering water from fog and dew, holding it through the dry hours, using it sparingly until the next evening brings more moisture. Around you, on other patches of moss, on grass stems, on stones and logs, dew is forming in the same way. The glade is transforming into a place of universal moisture, every surface coated with water, everything wet and heavy with the night's condensation. This is a moment of abundance, a brief time when water is everywhere, when the glade is saturated with moisture before the sun returns to draw it away. The darkness begins, very slowly, to change, not lifting, exactly, but becoming less absolute. The deepest black of night is giving way to the dark gray that precedes dawn. This change is almost imperceptible at first. You might not notice it for several minutes, but it's happening. The slow turning of the earth, bringing this part of the world back toward the sun. The stars, which have been bright overhead all night, begin to fade as the sky lightens. The constellations that wheeled overhead through the dark hours, Orion, the Pleiades, the great arc of the Milky Way, become less distinct, their light washed out by the gathering dawn. Soon they'll be invisible, lost in the brightness of day, waiting for another night to reveal themselves again. The glade remains dark, but the darkness is no longer complete. You can begin to sense shapes. The darker wall of trees surrounding the clearing, the lighter patches that might be moss or grass, the vague outlines of fallen logs. Nothing is clear yet, just suggestions, but the visible world is slowly returning. The temperature, which has been falling all night, reaches its minimum. This is the coldest moment, the hour just before dawn, when the Earth's heat radiation has cooled the surface as much as it will, and the sun hasn't yet begun to warm things again. The air is crisp and cold, perhaps in the low 40s Fahrenheit, maybe cooler. The dew, which has been forming throughout the night, is at its thickest now. On the moss where you rest, the coating of water is heavy and complete. The moss is as wet as it can be without standing water, saturated with moisture. Each tiny leaf, each small stem, is coated with dew. If there were light to see by, the moss would appear dark with water, its normal green deepened to almost black by the wetness. Time continues its slow passage, and the sky continues to lighten. The eastern horizon, though you can't see it from the glade, is beginning to glow with the first hint of sunrise. That glow spreads across the sky, turning the darkness to gray, the gray to a pale blue. The stars disappear completely, their light unable to compete with the coming day. In the glade, the mist that hasn't settled as dew begins to thin. As the air warms slightly with the approach of dawn, some of the moisture returns to vapor. The thick blanket of mist that filled the glade through the night starts to break up, becoming patchy, thinning from the top downward. Soon, perhaps within an hour, the mist will be gone entirely, evaporated by the warming air, but the dew will remain longer, protected by its contact with the cool ground. The light continues to grow, and now you can see the glade properly for the first time. The moss is a deep green, almost emerald, rich with moisture and life. It spreads across the center of the glade in great patches. Soft and inviting, the grass stems are visible as individual plants, each one decorated with tiny droplets of dew arranged along its length like jewels on a string. The fallen logs scattered across the glade are dark with moisture, their weathered wood coated with a film of water. Moss grows on these logs too, creating layers, the moss on the moss, life upon life, all of it sustained by the moisture that the night brings. The stones that jut above the ground are wet and dark, their surfaces glistening now that there's light to create the glisten. The forest surrounding the glade becomes visible as a wall of green, the trees distinct now, rather than just a mass of darkness. Individual trunks can be seen, some straight, some bent, all of them massive and ancient. The canopy above them is still mostly dark. But as the light grows, you can begin to see the network of branches, the way they interweave to create the roof of the forest. The sky continues to lighten, moving from pale blue to a brighter blue. And then there's a shift in quality as the sun, still below the horizon, sends its first light into the upper atmosphere. The light changes from blue to a gentle pink, and this pink glow spreads across the visible sky, painting the clouds, if there are any, in pastel shades. This is the alpenglow of dawn, the beautiful transition between night and day. The dew remains on the moss, undisturbed by the growing light. You rest there, part of the moisture that saturates this small patch of earth, and you wait for the sun. Soon, when the sun rises high enough to reach over the eastern ridges and into this valley, its warmth will begin the process of evaporation. The water that you're part of will begin to return to vapor, molecule by molecule, lifting into the air once more to begin another cycle of transformation. But that hasn't happened yet. For now, you simply exist as dew on moss, as moisture on earth, as water in its liquid form resting in a quiet glade while dawn approaches and the world prepares to wake. The moment arrives slowly, as all moments in this glade arrive. The sun, which has been climbing toward the horizon in the east, finally reaches the point where its light can clear the ridges and mountains that stand between it and this valley. The first ray of sunlight enters the glade, touching the top of the tallest tree on the eastern edge, illuminating its highest branches in warm, golden light. That light is pure and clean, the light of early morning that has passed through less atmosphere than the light of midday will, carrying a quality that makes everything it touches seem fresh and new. The illuminated branches seem to glow, catching fire with the sun's warmth, while everything below them remains in shadow, still part of the cool dimness of pre-dawn. The light descends slowly as the sun climbs higher. It moves down the trunk of that first tree, creeps along the forest floor at the edge of the glade, and then, finally, enters the clearing itself. The first sunlight touches the moss on the far side of the glade, the eastern edge, and the transformation is immediate and beautiful. The moss, which appeared dark even in the growing dawn light, suddenly glows green. Not just green, but brilliantly, intensely green. The color somehow concentrated and amplified by the moisture that coats every tiny leaf. The dew catches the sunlight and scatters it, creating a sparkle, a glisten, as if the moss were covered in tiny diamonds. Every droplet acts as a lens and a mirror, bending light, reflecting light, creating a display of brilliance that seems almost unnatural in its beauty. As the sun continues to climb, the light spreads across the glade, and the transformation spreads with it. Patch after patch of moss lights up in that brilliant green. The grass stems, with their rows of dew droplets, become strings of light, each droplet catching the sun and shining. The fallen logs begin to glow where the sun touches them, their wet surfaces reflecting the golden light. The stones scattered through the glade, dark and wet, become glossy in the sunlight. The moisture coating them creates a sheen, a surface that reflects light like polished stone. And all around the glade, on every surface, on every blade of grass, and every stem, and every moss plant, and every stone, the dew glitters with a million points of light. You're part of this brilliance, part of the moisture that creates this display. the droplet of dew that you've become, resting on the moss in the center of the glade, catches the sunlight when the light finally reaches this far. The sun's warmth touches you, and something shifts. The cold that has held you as liquid water through the night begins to give way to warmth, and the warmth triggers a transformation. Evaporation doesn't happen instantly. It's not a switch that flips from liquid to vapor. It's a gradual process, molecules breaking free from the liquid surface one at a time, each one gaining enough energy from the sun's heat to overcome the forces that hold it to its neighbors. The first molecules evaporate, then more still, and slowly, very slowly, the moisture on the moss begins to decrease. You can sense this transition, sense the way molecules are leaving, returning to the air as vapor. It's peaceful. This return to vapor, no struggle, no resistance, just a gradual shift from one state to another. The sun continues to warm the glade, and the evaporation continues, and you're part of both the remaining liquid and the emerging vapor, existing in both states at once as the transformation unfolds. The glade is warming now. The temperature, which was in the low 40s in the pre-dawn cold, is climbing into the 50s, then higher. As it warms, the air can hold more moisture, and the evaporation accelerates. The dew that was so thick and heavy just an hour ago is beginning to disappear. On the grass stems, the droplets shrink, become smaller, and then vanish completely. On the stones, the glisten begins to fade as the water evaporates. Even on the moss, which holds moisture longer than other surfaces, the coating of dew is thinning. The mist that remained in the glade through the early dawn is gone now, evaporated by the warming air and the sun's heat. The visibility has returned to normal. You can see across the glade clearly, can see the individual trees in the forest beyond, can see the blue sky above with its few wispy clouds drifting high overhead. Those clouds are made of water vapor, just as you were when you began this journey. And they'll have their own journey to make, their own transformations to undergo. The sun continues its climb into the morning sky, and its warmth continues to spread across the glade. The brilliant glisten of the dew is fading now as the water evaporates. The moss, though still damp, no longer sparkles quite so intensely. The grass stems have lost their diamond strings of droplets. The stones are beginning to dry, their surfaces returning to the matte finish they have in the absence of moisture. And you continue to evaporate, molecule by molecule, returning to the air as vapor. This is the completion of the cycle, the return to the state you started in when you were part of a cloud high above the mountains. The journey has come full circle, from cloud to mist to dew and back to vapor. The water that traveled over mountains, descended through forests, settled on moss in a quiet glade is rising again, invisible once more, ready to begin another journey when conditions are right. The evaporation continues through the morning, and by the time the sun is halfway to its noon position, the dew is mostly gone. The moss is still damp, still holding moisture in its structure, but the visible coating of water has evaporated. The glade looks different now, drier, less magical, more ordinary. But it's not truly dry. The moss holds moisture deep in its tissue, and the soil beneath holds moisture too, and the air above holds moisture as vapor. The water hasn't disappeared, it's simply changed form again, continuing its endless cycle through the hydrological processes that have been ongoing since water first appeared on Earth. You rise with the warming air, part of the vapor now, invisible and free. Below, The glade continues its day, the moss soaking up sunlight, the grass growing imperceptibly, the forest surrounding it all, maintaining its ancient, patient presence. And you rise higher, dispersing into the air, mixing with other water molecules, becoming part of the atmospheric reservoir of moisture that will, eventually, form clouds again. Begin the journey again, complete the cycle again. But that's ahead. For now, you simply rise, carried by warming air currents, leaving the glade behind, and the forest, and the mountains, moving back into the sky from which you descended during the night's gentle journey. You're part of the air again now, invisible vapor rising from the valley, dispersing into the warming atmosphere of mid-morning. The glade is far below, and the forest, and the mountains over which you traveled. The journey that began as cloud high above the landscape has completed its cycle, bringing you back to vapor, back to the invisible reservoir of moisture that fills the air. This cycle has no true beginning and no true ending. Water moves through these transformations constantly, vapor condensing into droplets, droplets forming clouds, clouds becoming mist, mist settling as dew, dew evaporating back to vapor. The cycle continues day after day, year after year, century after century, driven by the sun's heat and the earth's cooling, by the physics of phase transitions and the endless movement of air currents. The specific journey you followed, from cloud to mountain mist to forest fog to dew on moss, is just one of countless paths that water takes through this cycle. Other droplets might have fallen as rain, soaking into soil, flowing through underground channels, emerging in springs, running in streams to rivers to the sea. Others might have condensed on a spider's web, creating a string of perfect pearls that gleamed in the morning sun before evaporating an hour later. Still others might have become frost on a high peak, frozen into crystal patterns of astonishing beauty. Each path is unique, but all paths are part of the same greater cycle, the circulation of water through the Earth's systems that has been ongoing for billions of years. The water that formed the dew in the glade this morning has made this journey countless times before and will make it countless times again. It might have been part of ancient oceans, might have fallen as rain on dinosaurs, might have frozen in glaciers during ice ages, might have been drunk by every form of life that has ever existed on Earth. And now it rises again, warming in the morning sun, dispersing into the atmosphere, ready to begin another journey when conditions align, perhaps tomorrow night, or next week, or next month. This same water will condense again, will form clouds again, will drift over mountains again, will settle as dew again. The cycle continues, patient and eternal, indifferent to the passage of time. Below, the glade rests in the morning sunlight. The moss, having absorbed what moisture it could, waits for the next fog, the next dew. The grass grows, bending in the gentle breeze that has begun to stir now that the sun has warmed the air. The forest surrounds it all, ancient and patient, having witnessed these cycles for centuries, knowing that the evening will bring coolness again, that the night will bring mist again, that the dawn will bring dew again. Everything continues, following patterns so old they seem like permanence itself. You rise higher, dispersing, becoming one with the great mass of water vapor that fills the atmosphere. You're no longer a distinct droplet, no longer a separate entity, just part of the whole, mixed with moisture from 1,000 other sources, from oceans and lakes, from rivers and soil, from the breath of living things and the evaporation of morning dew. All of it together, all of it one, all of it cycling endlessly through the transformations that define water's existence on Earth. And the journey continues. Always, there is no end, no final resting place, just ongoing transformation, patient and eternal. From vapor to cloud, to mist to dew, and back to vapor, the cycle unfolds. And you are part of it, have always been part of it, will always be part of it. The morning grows warmer, the sun climbs higher, the air stirs with gentle currents, and somewhere, perhaps over distant mountains, or over the sea, or over forests you'll never see, conditions are aligning for the cycle to begin again. Moisture is gathering, temperature is dropping, clouds are forming. The journey awaits, patient as water has always been patient, ready to unfold in its own slow time. And so you drift, part of the air, part of the sky, part of the endless circulation of water through the world, moving toward transformations yet to come, peaceful and unhurried, following the way of the wandering mist. Rest now. Let the journey continue in your dreams.